Old Testament scholar Dan McClellan argues that the sex laws in Leviticus 18 and 20 punish with death even victims of rape in acts of incest, adultery, and man-male intercourse. Is this yet another case of Dogma Dan over Data Dan? That's the question that we're going to explore in this video, part 5 of my rejoinder to Dan McClellan's 44-minute responding to Robert Gagnon. Hi, I'm Robert Gagnon, visiting Bible scholar at Wesley Biblical Seminary in Ridgeland, Mississippi. I've been publishing on the Bible and homosexual practice, as well as other issues, for a quarter century, starting with a 500-page book on the subject and many publications since then. Part of what I do is deal with bad revisionist arguments emanating from LGBTQ dogma. LGBTQ dogma is invested in dismissing the biblical witness as irrelevant for homosexual practice today. In a video McClellan did on Sodom, he claims that the sex prohibitions in Leviticus 18 and 20 punish with death even someone who is coerced into sex, raped, not...
Yes, both parties are condemned to death in all of the inappropriate sexual intercourse that is described in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, including when the other party is an animal. So it very clearly has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the agency or consent of the receptive partner.
Raped. Not even the Jewish scholar Jacob Mgrim, author of an acclaimed 3-volume commentary on Leviticus for the Yale Anchor Bible series, and himself an apologist for gay relationships, thought this. There are 3 main reasons why one should conclude that McClellan is operating out of LGBTQ dogma rather than biblical data. First, let's be frank here, it's just plain nuts to say that if a man rapes his neighbor's wife, or a male, or a close blood relative, be it a mother or stepmother, daughter or daughter-in-law, that Levitical law mandates that his victim be executed along with him. Second, Deuteronomic law does not penalize the victim of adulterous rape, and neither Aaronite priestly legal material in Numbers nor Levitical legal material in Deuteronomy executes persons for unpremeditated murder. In short, intentionality factors into moral, not merely ritual, offenses. Deuteronomy 22, verses 23 to 27, specifies that if a man lies with a young woman engaged to another man, the young woman is not punished if she cries for help. The cries are the sign that she did not consent to the intercourse. Only the man is executed. Indeed, if a cry for help cannot be heard in the open country, it is enough that she, quote, may have cried for help, unquote, to exempt her from judgment. The law assumes in her favor that she is a victim. Even in the case of homicide, when there is no evidence of premeditation, provision is made for a person to escape to one of the 6 cities of refuge. See Numbers 35, Deuteronomy 19, Joshua 20. Third, Leviticus 20 uses the culpability formula. He or they shall certainly be put to death. His or their blood, that is blood guilt, be upon him or them. This culpability formula justifies the execution of the parties involved. Per Brown Driver Briggs, Hebrew English Lexicon, the formula means that each person, quote, is responsible for his own death, unquote, presuming consent on the part of both parties. The formula appears only in Leviticus 20, verses 9, 11, 12, 13, 16, 27, which is part of the Holiness Code, and it also appears in Ezekiel 18:13. Though there is the similar formula elsewhere, his or their or your blood guilt will be on his, their, or your head or heads. Now it's clear that in Ezekiel, the phrase means that each person will be punished only for his own unforced sins. According to Ezekiel, from his time forward, the sins of the parents will no longer fall on the children, or vice versa. Each will be responsible for his or her own unforced actions and recompensed accordingly. The occurrence in Ezekiel is pivotal. because Ezekiel scholars acknowledge an affinity between this prophet and the holiness code found in Leviticus 17 to 26. So likely what Ezekiel thought about this culpability formula was shared by the authors of Leviticus 20. Even Jacob Mgrim, in his commentary on Leviticus, interprets the formula as indicating, first, the culpability of the offender and the absolution of the executioner from blood guilt, and second, the consent of the parties to the immorality. For Leviticus 20, verse 11, that is a man having sex with his mother or stepmother, Mgrim states, quote, her culpability presumes her consent. For Leviticus 20:13, that is a man having sex with a male. According to Mgrim, the blood formula is, quote, emphasizing the culpability of the passive partner, presuming, of course, that he gave his consent. It's not likely then that the use of the formula, their blood be upon them, in Leviticus 20, verse 16, for the case of a woman and an animal, should be taken as signaling that consent is irrelevant in all the other sex laws in Leviticus 20. The most likely solution is that the animal is being viewed as giving limited consent, especially in a case where the male animal penetrates the woman. This is in keeping with Exodus 21, verses 28 to 32, which imposes death on an ox that gores a human. See also Genesis 9:5. Your blood for your lives I will require. From the hand of every animal I will require it. That is, if the animal takes the life of a human. So Leviticus scholar Jacob Mgrim comments, quote, the animal dies in Leviticus 20, verses 15 to 16, because it has sinned, as does the goring ox. Execution of an animal requires less consent than would be required of a human, because execution of a creature not made in God's image has a lower threshold. So again, Genesis 9:6, quote, the one who sheds the blood of the human, by the human his blood will be shed, for in the image of God, he, God, made the human. Once again, the fact that McClellan chose the least likely interpretive option in an effort to narrow the scope of the prohibition of man-male sex is a testament to his dogma over data approach in treating biblical texts. To underscore how convoluted McClellan's logic is, note what he alleges about the prohibition of man-male intercourse in Leviticus 18:22, along with the other sex laws in the chapter.
It almost certainly had to do with non-consensual intercourse, which is why the prohibition is only on the man who is seeking out the insertive role. It doesn't say anything about the agency of the man who is taking the receptive role.
It sounds like McClellan is saying here that because Leviticus 18 addresses only the man who takes the insertive role, it must be referring to non-consensual intercourse. If that is indeed what he is claiming, it's ridiculous, because by extension, all the sex acts in Leviticus 18 would then have to be prohibiting only those forms of immoral sexual behavior that involved rape. This in turn would imply the untenable proposition that consensual incest and adultery, in addition to homosexual practice, would be acceptable. It also makes no sense of his reasoning in Leviticus 20, which sex prohibitions are clearly aimed at all the parties involved. On the one hand, McClellan claims for Leviticus 18 that the alleged non-punishment of the receptive partner dictates that the act is non-consensual. On the other hand, McClellan claims that even though Leviticus 20 does explicitly punish the receptive partner, here too non-consensual acts are involved. What? Does McClellan himself not know what he's saying? The reality is that the apodictic form of the prohibitions, and by that I mean the absolute, unqualified, universally binding thou shalt not form, does not mean that only the insertive partner is being punished, or that a consenting receptive partner is off the hook. Jacob Mgrim, in his Leviticus commentary, proposes that, quote, these laws are directed to the head of the household, and their enforcement was left entirely in his hands, unquote. If he fails to enforce, these laws, then Yahweh will take direct action. We see this divine enforcement in the apodictic or absolute Yahwistic law found within the ancient book of the covenant in Exodus 21 to 23. For example, quote, "You shall not abuse any widow or orphan. If you do, when they cry out to me, I will kill you, says Yahweh, and your wives shall become widows, and your children orphans." Exodus 22, verses 22 to 24. In Leviticus 20, however, the situation is different from Leviticus 18. Courts of elders and court-appointed executioners are involved. McClellan's contention that the sex laws in Leviticus 18 and 20 are punishing with death persons raped is such a ridiculous argument that it underscores how deeply in the grips of LGBTQ dogma McClellan is when it comes to interpreting biblical data. Once again, it's Dogma Dan, not Data Dan, who shows up when talking about the Bible and homosexuality. It looks like the man who makes his living vilifying evangelicals for allegedly preferring dogma over data in interpreting biblical texts is guilty of this very thing from the vantage point of left-wing authoritarian identity politics. Do be sure to check out my other responses to Dan McClellan on my YouTube page, especially my 2 responses to him on Jesus and homosexuality, and my other responses to him on the Levitical prohibitions. God bless.